So welcome everybody. Let's get started with today's event, The Science of Goal Setting, How to Set High Goals and Actually Hit Them in 2018. My name is Diana Asbury, and I'm the marketing manager here. I'll be your host and moderator for today's event. We're calling in from the Rapid Learning Institute headquarters in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm joined here by our subject matter expert. He's our editorial director, and his name is Michael Boyette. Hey, Michael.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, all right, so we're hosting today's webinar because, well, here's the thing, guys, it's January, and we all know it's the time of year when everyone feels like they've been given that fresh start, right? You know, we all feel it right now. So we map out the next year, and the excitement escalates until, last year's missed goals.
Till March.
Yeah, right? or so, like, you start thinking about, oh, man, last year's goals, why didn't I miss those? We're feeling hesitant, nervous, and then we're feeling guilty. All these feelings, right? So I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about, yeah? So if you're here today because in 2018 you want to crush your goals, you want to make sure that your team and your company, they scale to new heights, then what I'd love for you to do now is go back to that questions box, type in there, I'm ready, let's do this. Show us that you are here, you're listening, and you're ready to get started with today's presentation because, you know, we really need some excitement. It's January and this weather, right? Yeah. All right, let's see. Sarah said, let's do this. Kimberly said, I am ready. Mary, the time is now. I love that, Mary. Awesome. Shanita said, I am ready to conquer 2018. Natalie says, I'm ready to go. Oh, yes. Oh, Matt says, I am ready to catch fire. I love it. There's a lot of excitement here, and I'm so glad that you all are here. And now I'd really like to just take 2 seconds here and share something with you. Here at the Rapid Learning Institute, our mission is to deliver a single behavior-changing insight in the time it takes to make a cup of coffee. That short, right? Really, really short. So the training gets done no matter how time-pressed your team is. So we created the Rapid Learning Center, and inside of that, you would find the 5 to 7 minute micro videos. Each one delivers one powerful concept that takes on everyday challenges you and your teams face. There are over 100 of these sales training videos, 70+ leadership videos, and more than 25 employment law programs. So in today's event, we're going to be splitting it into 2 parts. In the first 20 minutes or so, Mike will talk about effective goal setting. Then, if it's okay with you guys, I'm just going to take about 60 seconds to share a little bit more about the Rapid Learning Center. So like I said, just about a minute, and then what we're going to do is get right back to goal execution strategies, and we'll follow that with your questions. So at any point during today's program, you can ask questions using that same questions box you just used to tell me how excited you are to be here. I'm so excited you're here too. So then after this event, we are going to be sending you an email with a link to a survey. Please take the survey. I will tell you, we read all of the feedback you give us, and we use it to improve these programs. So send all of your thoughts in using that link. Now, what I'd like to do is take a second and introduce today's speaker. His name is Michael Boyette. Hello again, Michael.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, all right, Michael is our editorial director. He is also the author of our leadership blog, which has thousands of monthly readers. He's been a featured contributor for Salesforce, Forbes, and many other leading publications, so much more. But without further ado, Michael, I know we are starting with setting goals the right way, yeah? And can you give us an overview of what you're going to cover in this first portion?
Sure, and like you said, Diana, I really want to start in this first half and talk about setting goals, and then in the second half we're going to talk a little bit more about execution. But you know, setting goals, it's not a simple thing, and it's where you start. So if you get that part wrong, then I mean, forget about execution, right? If you're executing on the wrong goals or goals that aren't well drafted, then the whole process is pretty much down the drain. So I want to start with a concept most people are familiar with, and that's SMART goals, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah. So I've heard of SMART goals, and I bet many of our listeners have as well, right?
Right.
But if you're bringing it up today, Michael, then there must be research behind this concept, or tell me, is it just that you really love acronyms?
Well, I do love acronyms, and that is a great acronym. But no, I want to go into a little bit of depth on this because I think most people are familiar with SMART goals, and I don't want to kind of just rehash and say, oh, here's this new thing. But I really want to talk about kind of why, where that concept comes from, and kind of what the science says about it, because it really is a well-grounded concept. So this was a concept that was first introduced back in 1981 in an article by a guy named G.T. Duran in Harvard Business Review. And again, hats off to him for coming up with a with a great acronym that we all embrace. And I think again, most people probably know what SMART goals are and what the acronym stands for. It's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And actually, when Duran first published this article, the R stood for realistic, and I think people sort of said, well, that's really the same thing as achievable. So somewhere along the line, somebody subbed in the concept of relevant, which is actually a really great one to have in there, and we're going to talk about that one specifically a little bit later on. So there really is science behind this concept, but to really understand where it comes from, I do need to back up a little bit and give just a very brief sort of history lesson on goal setting, because we think of goal setting as just something that's in the air, it's just something natural, like like why would you not set goals, right? But before the 1960s, goal setting really wasn't part of the business culture. I mean, companies, they had their financial goals, their profit margins, that sort of thing. And people would set goals for themselves. They'd set New Year's resolutions, or they wanted to make enough money to retire by 30, or make $1 million, or whatever. But those, there was not really like kind of a scientific approach to this, or much thought about what kinds of goals you should be setting. Right? There wasn't like formal process. And for example, I mean, it seems hard to believe these days, but back in the day, managers didn't sit down with people and set their goals, and they didn't use goals, to drive the performance of evaluation, those sorts of things. There was just kind of this philosophy, okay, here's your job, do your job, we're going to evaluate whether you did your job or not, and that's a different thing than kind of a goal-based approach. So the modern approach to goal setting really started only in 1968, and a researcher named Edwin Locke published a paper called Toward a Theory of Goal Setting. And you think about that, well, why do you need a theory of goal setting, right? But he got people thinking about it a little differently. And it's funny because he started with what really seems like a blindingly obvious question, right? Why do we set goals? And of course, the blindingly obvious answer is, well, we set goals so we can hit them. And again, it seems obvious, but there's a philosophy behind that really goes back to the early 20th century. There was a book called Think and Grow Rich that was very popular. It was published in 1937, and kind of the key phrase from that was, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. So the idea was you set a goal so that somehow, by having this vision of what you want in front of you, that's somehow going to make it all happen, right? And that's kind of where goal setting stood in 1968 when Locke published his paper. But he answered that question a little bit differently. He said, we set goals to improve performance.
Right, so you can't just wish something to happen and poof, it's there.
Right.
But what's the fundamental difference between Locke's process and the previous approaches to goal setting?
Okay, and it sounds like it's the same thing, right? But there is this subtle distinction, because if we say that we set goals to improve performance, well, performance, what we're really talking about is behavior. So we need to think about goals as a tool to influence behavior. And again, if you keep this in your mind as just kind of something, when you're thinking about your goals, always keep it related to behavior. Goals are about driving behavior. So that was the answer to the first obvious question that Locke had. And then he followed up with another obvious question. He asked, do people perform better if they have goals, right? Well, of course they do, right? Of course you perform better if you have goals. But guess what? Locke found that the answer was not quite that obvious. It wasn't yes, it was a yes, but, because it really depends on the kind of goal. So what he did is he reviewed like hundreds of studies about goal setting, and he found increases in performance related to goal setting in 90% of the cases where the goals were two things, specific and challenging. So what he really found is that some goals affect behavior, but others don't. And the ones that don't, for example, are these sort of general goals. And again, this gets back to what we, I want to retire by the time I'm 30. These sort of big, general, vague goals. An example, will always do my best in every situation. And the studies showed that these had no impact on behavior. And if you think about why, you think the reason is because it's virtually impossible to tie, again, those specific behaviors, any specific behavior, to a goal that's that general and broad. So, if I'm your manager and I say, well, just go out and do your best every day, right? As an employee, what does that tell me? Does that tell me what I should be doing? And no, it really doesn't. So Locke said that goals only drive behavioral choices if they're specific and they're measurable.
So for the managers joining us, why is knowing this so important?
Well, think about it from the manager's perspective, right? Your job is to influence behavior. Your job is to get results through other people. So you need to impact their behavior. And as a manager, your tools for changing behavior are limited. As a human being, your tools for changing behavior are limited. If you're a parent, you know that for sure. So, but this idea of goals as a tool to change behavior, what it really does is it extends your management capabilities, right? Because what a goal does, if it's set right, is it gets employees to be their own managers. It gets them to manage their own behavior. So they're making the right choices about what to do and what not to do without you sort of looking over their shoulder and kind of micromanaging them. It's the goals that they give them the guidance and tell them what to do, so you don't have to be there every day looking over their shoulder and telling them what to do. So what does that mean? So what do goals really do? And again, think about it this way. What goals do is they narrow your attention. Right? They direct your effort to goal-relevant activities. And at the same time, they also direct your attention away from goal-irrelevant actions. So they tell you what to focus on, and the other side of that is just as important but often overlooked. They tell you what not to focus on. They tell you what not to spend your time on. And so if you look at SMART goals, again, if you come back to this idea, what are those acronyms, what are those letters talking about? They're talking about setting limits on your goals, right? You're drawing lines around the goals. Because you don't, as we said, these big sloppy goals, they don't really pass muster. So when you set a SMART goal, what you're really doing is you're making the goal smaller and smaller. And this is incredibly important when it comes to driving behavior, because what it does, it draws a line and it becomes a yardstick that you can use every day to decide whether to do something or not. Now, what does that mean? So let me just draw an extreme example just to make the point. Let's say I'm in sales and I've set a goal, or my boss has set a goal to increase sales by 10%. Okay, so what's that goal going to tell me about my behaviors? Like somebody comes to me and says, hey, do you want to be on this task force to help us pick out the new office furniture? Or hey, you want to help us plan the company picnic? And I'm not saying you're going to say no to those things. Maybe that's something I'll do if I have time or if they're important, for my social game or whatever. But the goal reminds me that they do nothing to help me advance that goal, right? So the goal helps me prioritize my behaviors. The behaviors that are related to my goal, to getting that extra 10%, are going to take priority, and they should take priority over the other things. Whereas if I just had a broad goal, like be the best salesperson ever, or have exceptional customer service, again, it doesn't help you draw that line between what to do and what not to do. You can't tell really whether any given behavior is goal related or not. So if you think about this, one of the things that goals do is the goal allows you to say no.
I think that is so important. And when I look back at the responses we got at the beginning of this, Marjorie said that she's too busy. Let's see, Christian said not enough bandwidth, right? Let's see, Thomas says lots of incoming requests. We all feel this pressure. So drawing a line and saying, hey, this is my goal, and I shouldn't feel guilty about saying no to other things is just an awesome concept here.
Right, and again, we'll get into this a little. When we get into the execution, it doesn't mean you're going to say no to the company picnic or picking out the office furniture. A well-drawn goal strategy is going to allow you to do those other things as well. But again, it's all about focus and priorities and having the power to say no to certain things or to put certain things at the top of the list.
Yeah, and you have some more information about that later, which I know is really, really good information. So now you've covered specific and measurable. What about ART?
Okay, yeah, so S&M, we've covered S&M, so anybody who came here thinking we were going to have a webinar about something else, first of all, well, you're sorely disappointed at this point, I think, and at the same time, yeah, I think you can check out now. But for the rest of us, we're gonna go forward, and now we're gonna talk about the ART. So specific and measurable, they're all about telling you what to do. Like I said, it's about defining the behaviors, right? The AR&T, achievable, relevant, and time bound, are the reasons we should do it. So it's not the what to do, it's the why to do it. So let's go through them quickly. Achievable, right? So if I have a goal that's out of reach, then it's not going to change my behavior. If I know there's no way I'm going to hit this goal, then it's going to have absolutely no impact on what I do day to day, right? Same thing with relevance, and again, this is why like relevance is better than the original R, because relevance is really about, does this goal matter, right? Does it make a difference? So if I have a goal and the goal's not relevant to what I want or what our company needs to do, then again, that goal is probably going to fail because it's just not worth doing, and we know that. And then the third part is this time-bound idea that a goal needs to have a kind of a deadline on it. And there's some interesting research on this about the effect of time on motivation. And there's something called temporal discounting, and there's a lot of research on this. And what it really boils down to is the idea that things that happen in the distant future are less motivating than things that happen in the near future. And I think we all sort of intuitively get this, right? If somebody says they're going to give me $20 at the end of today, that's a lot more motivating than getting $20 a month from now or a year from now. I think of the old Popeye cartoons, right? I think it's Wimpy, right? And he says, I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. And so what Wimpy's doing is he's using the value of time discounting because he wants the hamburger right away. He wants the reward right away, but he doesn't want to pay the cost until later. And so actually researchers can go through it and they actually calculate how much value gets discounted by time. And this time discounting affects both goals and rewards. So it's a concept that you might want to think about in terms of bonuses and incentives as well. But the takeaway on the goal setting side is that a near-term goal has a lot more impact on behavior than a long-term goal. It's a lot more motivating. So you see, that's why, we all know that salespeople, they close more deals at the end of the month or the end of the quarter. And it's because, because the time discounting is less. If they're thinking about their end of year goals in February or March, they're not giving them that much weight. But if they've got an end of month goal or an end of quarter goal, that's going to be a lot more motivating.
Okay, so SMART goals are based on science, but you have to use a specific SMART formulation?
No, you don't. And I mean, it's a really good one. A lot of people use it, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But I guess what I'm trying to get at here is kind of the underlying thinking on where that acronym comes from, and however you frame your goals, it's these principles that are the most important. And I guess the key takeaway is that what you want are limited, well-defined goals that can be mapped behaviors. Again, the key concept in SMART goals is they're smaller. You make them smaller, you limit them.
Okay, so Michael, let's bring this back to reality for everybody joining us today. Can you share a practical example of how this approach works?
Sure. Let's take an example, and we used a sales example before, so let's take a management example this time. And let's say your company has a retention problem. You've got too much turnover, right? So you might make your first general pass at a goal. It's going to look like you say, well, we need to increase retention. And now, obviously, that's too broad. So what you want to start doing is you want to start narrowing it down. So again, you can use that SMART. That SMART formulation. You can say for 2018, right, you've put a time limit on it. We want to reduce the turnover rate from 25% to 10%. So it's specific, it's measurable. Is it achievable? Well, it should be, and hopefully you've done your homework and looked at industry benchmarks or your past performance. Say, yeah, this is a goal that I think we can all agree is achievable. Is it relevant? Yeah, absolutely, because lower turnover is highly correlated with business results. We all know that. So this is a goal worth pursuing. And is it time bound? Yep. We have that for 2018. So the boundary on that is the end of the year. So it looks like we're pretty good, right? We've got our SMART goal. It's all set, but we're not done yet, because if you just implement that goal the way it is, you have to think about, so what are the possible negative consequences? Because again, we're setting up a goal to drive behavior, and that goal will drive behavior, but there's different behaviors that can get you to that goal. And some of those are useful behaviors and some of them are destructive behaviors, right? If you say, if managers take away from this goal the idea that, well, I can't fire anyone in 2018 because it's gonna ding me on the numbers, then they're going to be incentivized by the goal to retain people they should be getting rid of, right? Or if they say, well, I'm going to create a bonus structure, and all the bonuses are going to be paid in January. So that way, if anybody's thinking about leaving toward the end of the year, at least they're going to stick around till January. So my 2018 numbers look great. What happens in 2019, we'll deal with that, right? So these aren't necessarily the outcomes you want. So when you're thinking about your goal setting, again, you want to narrow that goal. You want to make it narrow, right? So what you want to do in that case is you want to set these goals or frame them in a way that links them tightly to the behaviors that you want, but you also want to exclude the undesired behaviors, right? So you want to say, we don't want to just reduce turnover. We want to reduce voluntary turnover, people who choose to leave. So that way the manager doesn't get dinged for firing somebody who should be fired. Or we say we want to reduce voluntary turnover without increasing payroll costs more than cost of living or whatever it is. So again, you're taking the option of using a bonus to keep people around artificially till the end of the year off the table. So what are you doing? You're taking that goal and you're limiting it. You're limiting your manager's options, but you're doing it in a good way. So you're closing off those loopholes. You're closing off ways that people can cheat, and that forces managers to really focus on the things they should be doing. They have to start thinking, well, why are people leaving? What behaviors am I doing that I can change that may get them to stick around further? So they're focused on the right thing. What, as a manager, do they need to change, and not kind of how they can kind of game the system to get the result. And now we're getting into the how. So I think we'll take a little break here and get into execution a little bit more after the break. But for now, I want to hand it over back to Diana to talk a little bit about our sponsor, which is us.
All right, so yeah, we're about halfway through the main presentation, and this is the perfect time for me to just take a minute and share a little bit more about the Rapid Learning Center. What we're going to do when we get back in about 60 seconds, I know Michael has teed up some interesting information about executing, actually achieving what you're aiming for. And we had done this program yesterday, and it was really, really great information. So I can't wait for you guys to hear it now. Some of the research Michael is discussing today is brand new, never been seen before in any of our programs. But the concrete concepts align with a few of our 5 to 7 minute micro videos. So I just wanted to share which ones those were real quickly. All right, so the first one here is in our sales platform, why you missed your goals and how to start hitting them. And then two are found in our leadership platform, why goal setting often doesn't lead to goal achievement, and another concept called drifting goals, why goals often erode over time, and how to keep them on track. And I know we're going to be talking about that towards the end, which I can't wait to get to. So the Rapid Learning Center itself, it covers so much more. Whether you're a sales leader looking to boost your sales force, or an HR director or executive looking to train your management team, everything you're looking for can be found in over 100 sales training videos, 70+ leadership videos, and more than 25 employment law programs, all of which are just 5 to 7 minutes long and backed by proven research. What I'd love to do now is offer all of you a free trial to the Rapid Learning Center. We're going to launch a poll. It'll stay up for about 15 seconds here. And just so you know, if you start your trial, you'll have access anytime, anywhere, from any device to these programs. Each of the programs is focused on one single research-based concept. And I have to tell you guys, this is not just for new hires. It's for experienced leaders and salespeople as well. And you'll be able to add members of your team so that you can really see if the system is right for you. Now, what I'd like to do is pull down this poll. I'll give you guys another chance towards the end of the webinar to select one of these options as well. But I want to get us right back to the content, which is why you're here. So, okay, so Michael, we've set goals and defined the behaviors that will be required to get there. So let's talk about actually executing the goals, right?
Yeah, so at this point in our program, all of us have now set those appropriate goals, and we've defined them, and we've narrowed them, and we've closed all the loopholes, so we're all set, right? That's it. And this is, this of course is where goal setting often falls apart, because we have those meetings in January, and we work through all that. We get those goals, great. Then what do? We put them in a drawer. We set them and forget them, And maybe we'll look at them at the end of the quarter, and maybe we'll look at them in July, right? Or maybe not, because in July, we're on vacation or whatever. So then what happens? About November, everybody starts getting nervous and they start looking around in their drawers, in their desk drawers, to find the to find those goals and see how they're doing. They're, oh well, gee, I didn't work on this one at all. This one's pretty good, but we don't pay any attention to them, right? So till the end of the year. So the first rule of execution is really that ongoing follow-up. And as a manager, if you get your people to set the goals and then you just figure your job is done, you don't review progress and provide feedback, then what's going to happen? Remember, goals are about behavior, and behavior is not going to change. So as this follow-up goes forward, you need to think about that. You need to think about the fact that your goals are probably written in terms of outcomes. What do we want to, what measurable result do we want to see? But as you do the follow-up, you also need to be monitoring behavior, and your people need to monitor their own behavior, because that's sort of the reality check. And let me explain what I mean by that. So let's say we set a goal, right, and we do check in 3 months or the end of the month or a couple of months, and we see that we're missing the mark, right? So then the question is, well, why are we missing the mark? Is it a strategy problem, or is it an execution problem? Have we defined the wrong behaviors, or did we define the right behaviors, but people aren't actually doing the behaviors? If part of our strategy is to give more praise to employees to reduce turnover, are we doing it and it's not working, or are we not doing it? And it's really important to understand that difference, right? Because you're going to have a different response depending on what you see. So how do you know the difference? Well, the only way to know the difference is to actually track the behaviors. So you want your employees, you want to be tracking behaviors, and you want your employees to be tracking that behavior as well.
All right, our focus can easily be swayed away from what's important. So how often should goals actually be reviewed so that we stay on track?
Okay, and this is where that idea we talked about before about temporal discounting comes in, right? Because an end-of-year goal has less impact on behavior than an end-of-month goal because of temporal discounting. So what you want to do in terms of setting up a schedule for reviewing goals and progress toward goals is you want to look for the smallest unit of measurement that can reasonably be tied to behavior. So what do I mean by that? So let's say if our goal, we define our goals in terms of closed sales, right? So if we have a sales cycle of 6 months, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be reviewing, how many closed sales did we have this week, how many next week, how many the week after that, because that increment of time, that week, is not at all related to the amount of time it takes to close a sale. So in that case, what you want to do is you want to break down that big goal into sub goals, right? So you want to say, okay, well, what else can we measure other than closed sales? Well, we can look at, am I getting appointments? Am I making presentations? Again, the smaller the goal, the easier it is to sort of keep track of it as you go down the road. So again, you want to break down that big goal into these incremental measurable bites, right? And the long-term goals drive the short-term goals. So if my goal is to lose 20 pounds this year, that's easy enough to turn into a goal saying I want to lose 1.6 pounds per month, and I can see whether I'm making progress or not. But if you can't get even more granular, because if you think about it, we're talking about behavior again, right? So behavior happens every day. So you really should be thinking about your goals every day, and am I doing the behaviors that advance them? So here's kind of a practical suggestion on how you can do that. I mean, we all keep to-do lists, and I know I have one. It's got a million things on it, right? So one of the things you can do is you can take that to-do list and you can divide it up into goal-related and non-goal-related action items, right? So that way, whatever else you're doing during the day, you can make sure that you're acting on your goals every day. You're going to be doing something that's moving them forward. You're going to be engaging in those behaviors. So again, this is just a simple technique that keeps you focused. And this is the answer to a concern that a couple of people raised, I think, at the beginning of the webinar, and we touched on it briefly. This idea of non-goal activity, right? So that new, pick out the office furniture, or what happens. The boss comes and says, "Oh, here's a new project. We absolutely have to get this done." And in the real world, you're not going to say to your boss, "Well, gee, that's not really related to my goals, so I'm going to hand it back to you," right? I mean, you have to do that. You have to have that flexibility. So when you divide up your to-do list this way, what you can also do is you can sort of allocate your time. So you can set aside enough time to work on the non-goal stuff, but still devote whatever percentage of the time that you need to achieve your goals to that. And again, it gives you that opportunity to say yes and no in a way that's going to make sure that those goals advance, right?
Sure, definitely. I think it's great to break down goals into smaller action steps, but I know you have research to share about just how important it is to show progress towards goals. And you know, we just had a comment from Don who's wondering, you know, are we going to address getting team member buy-in? And I think that this section is really going to help us that.
Yeah, very timely question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So, you teed that up really well for me.
So can you talk about progress towards a goal? Can you share that research?
Yeah, and this is another reason to do the, you know, to have those sub goals and to make it as granular as possible, because you know, there's a lot of research, or there's a lot of attention right now being given to research out of Harvard that was done by a professor named Teresa Amabile. And she found that the single most important factor in whether people feel they're successful at work is progress toward goals. She wrote a book, you may have heard of it, it's called The Progress Principle. And that's the key idea in here, is that the biggest motivator for employees day to day, what determines whether they're having a good day or a bad day is progress toward goals. So you need to build that into your goal setting and goal achievement strategy. This is a really key concept. I would encourage you to write it down. Build in visible progress toward goals. And obviously that's a lot easier to do when you have smaller increments, because people can see that, you know, they can see that progress, and that becomes incredibly motivating.
All right, so Michael, we've all heard the statistics that, you know, how many people sign up for the gym in January, right? And then mass amounts stop going to the gym in February, right? We've all heard that statistic. It's not a fact that the human race is proud of, but it's consistent with our nature, really, in goal setting. So we obviously don't want this to happen to our goals. So how do you make sure that the behaviors persist over time, and that we don't, you know, just stop in the middle of February?
Yeah, well, you know, this year I just thought I'm just going to cut to the chase, and I'm just going to stop going in January.
Oh, buddy.
so that way I can just cross it off my list. I have visible progress toward a goal, I guess. And
not going.
Yeah, not my goal is to not go, because I know that's where I end up anyway. But for the rest of you who do want to get to the gym, I guess, or achieve your goals at work, there is another strategy, and we're just going to touch on it briefly here. But this is one of the concepts that we talk about in our learning system that Diana mentioned before. So if you really want to learn more about it, you'll have an opportunity to get that free trial and dig into it a little more deeply. But briefly, here it is. So this starts with a study, and it actually did involve people exercising, going to the gym and exercising. And researchers found, not surprisingly, that setting that goal really isn't enough. So here's what they did. They set up this experiment, and they had 3 groups of people who all said they were committed to getting more exercise. And in group A, that's the control group, so they got no input from the researchers. They just went off and did their thing, like most of us, right? So group B, the researchers gave them what they call a motivational intervention, which was really literature showing that regular exercise could prevent heart disease. So it gave them a reason to go to the gym. And group C, they received that same motivational intervention, but they also filled out this form that you see here. During the next week, I will partake in at least 20 minutes of vigorous exercise and they had to write in a day, like Tuesday or Wednesday, and at a certain time of day, whether it's 7 in the morning or 6 in the afternoon or 6 in the evening or whatever, at or in a place, so usually the gym, right? So they actually had to write this stuff down on this piece of paper. It doesn't seem like a big deal, right? But let's look at the results. So for the control group, this is the people who just were left to themselves. 29% of them achieved the goal of exercising regularly. Now, when they put that motivational intervention in there, we got an increase, a slight increase to 39%. Still not great, right? But when we have the motivational intervention and we added this goal intention, which was this little statement that people filled out, we see an increase to 91%. And, you know, I don't know. I saw this study. I was a little bit skeptical, to be honest with you, because it really seems too simple, right? Oh, I'm just going to write down what I intend to do and when, and then, I mean, look, 91%, that's almost a guarantee that you're going to go to the gym. So I did approach it with some skepticism, and we dug into a little more, and we found that there's many experiments that really confirmed this concept. There was a program where they wanted patients to do medical self-evaluations, and the ones who committed to implementation intentions got 100% compliance versus 53% for those who didn't. There was another study where they asked students to submit an optional paper after Christmas break, so they could submit it or not. And 66% of the students who drafted implementation intentions actually wrote the paper and turned it in, versus a whopping 0% among those who did not. So, you know, that's some pretty powerful stuff, and it's something you can definitely use to increase the odds of hitting your goals. And it really boils down to this simple formula, and the formula goes like this. When situation X arises, I will perform response Y. So again, back to our example, on Tuesday at 8 a.m., I will go to the gym, right? The situation is it's Tuesday at 8 a.m. So what's my response? I'm going to go to the gym. In sales, you know, it may be an implementation intention may be as simple as, I will make 10 cold calls today, right? So it's today, that's the situation. So because I wrote it down, I'm going to actually make those 10 cold calls. Or, you know, it could also describe an action you'll take when you run into an obstacle, you know. So if you're trying to lose weight, your implementation intention may be, well, when I'm out to dinner and the dessert menu arrives, I'm going to push it aside and I'm not going to order dessert. Or in sales, you know, if a prospect is rude to me on a cold call, well, when that happens, I will immediately make another call. I've written it down, so when it happens, it's much more likely to actually occur.
All right, yeah, so for those managers who are joining us right now, you know, if they want to use this for their team as well, you know, this could be done with a sales team. So if this happens, I love the thought of, okay, you have a negative call, immediately make another one, because you don't want that negativity to spread, right?
Otherwise, you just get stuck. You just stop doing it. And I know that's what happens when I stop going to the gym. I missed a day, I missed a couple of days, and next thing I knew, I had just stopped. So if I had that intention, you know, well, it's Monday again, so here I go back in. I'm inspired. I'm going to do that this year.
Let's do it.
I'm going to renew my gym membership.
We're going to change this around right here. Yeah, so this is a really great way to get your employees on board. So, okay, well, I guess it's time, you know, for all of us to start writing down implementation intentions and all of our teams to do so. But let me ask you, Michael, is there any other tactics we can use to promote goal achievement?
Yeah, there's another one I want to talk about briefly. Again, you know, we could go into all this in a lot more depth, but let's go back to that R in SMART goals, right? We talked about this a little bit, relevance. And we said the goals must be worth achieving, right? So it has to be relevant to something that's important to you or to the organization, but also to you personally. And research shows that when you have a goal that you can really believe in or commit to, obviously it's a hugely influential moderator.
So you're saying that people really need a purpose? Yeah,
absolutely. And so again, how does this translate into some practical tactics for managers and salespeople? There's some research on this too, and there's a concept called line of sight, and researchers have found that performance increases dramatically when people have this line of sight specifically to the people who are affected by or benefit from the work that they're doing. So this was the experiment. They went to fundraisers for a university. These are people calling on the phone asking alumni for money, basically. And the fundraisers themselves, they were given these letters from people who had gotten scholarships. And the letters talked about how the scholarships helped these students get an education, how important it was for them, you know, how maybe they were the first in their family to get a college education, all because of this money that was available in scholarships. So when the fundraisers read those letters, now they knew who they were working for, right? They knew who was going to be affected by the effort that they were putting out. And guess what? They raised like a ton more money, because they knew that what they were doing was affecting someone out in the world. When they're asking for money, they were thinking about that person whose life was made better because that money was available.
So your employees really need to know, you know, why they're doing the work they're doing.
They need to know how the work they do affects other people is really the thing. So, you know, in sales, it's easier in sales because those are customer-facing jobs where you can actually see the impact. But if you've got people who are kind of like maybe not directly in contact with customers or the people who end up benefiting from what they do, it's really important to get them connected somehow.
Absolutely, yeah, that's great. All right, so as we get ready to wrap up here, and we're going to get right to the questions that you guys are writing in. So if you have a question now, use that questions box to write in your question. But what I would love for you to do, Michael, is if you could review the practical takeaways from the research on goal setting. And I know when you get to the end of this, you're going to talk about that drifting goals concept.
Yes,
so
we are.
Let's do that, all right?
Okay, so here we go. And again, people might want to just jot these down if they're taking notes. Some do's and don'ts around goal setting. So we talked about this one first earlier. Do narrow your goals, because again, a narrow goal tells you what to do, what behaviors to engage in, and also what behaviors not to engage in. And that leads to the second one, which is do set goals that are tied to behavior. Avoid those vague goals like do your best or retire by the time you're 30. You really focus on goals that can be defined, that can be mapped to behaviors. Third thing is, when you're doing your follow-up, you want to track behaviors as well as outcomes, because behaviors happen first, and you can't wait for the outcomes to kind of see if you're on the right track. So you really need to track the behaviors and see if you're doing them. The fourth thing we talked about was closing off those loopholes. And again, remember that turnover example. So you want to make sure your goals don't have loopholes, whether it's your personal goal or goals for your people. Because if there's a shortcut, people are going to be tempted to take it. And a lot of times that's where you get into these ethical problems. You've got the Enrons of the world or the Wells Fargo case that happened, or the Volkswagen case with the emissions. If you just set the goal and you don't close off those loopholes, then that's when people start sort of cutting corners to get there. So those are 4 do's. And now here's some don'ts to keep in mind. First one is don't give people a goal that they can't influence. So again, let's go back to our turnover example, right? You can't just dump on managers to reduce turnover if it's not their behavior that's causing the problem, right? If the turnover is related to working conditions or company policies or whatever, then you need to set goals for somebody else, to work on those things. And it's going to be incredibly demoralizing to give managers a goal to change something that they can't change, right? So make sure that the goals are actually things that people can influence. Another one to watch out for is using your goals. Don't use your goals as your people's goals. And this one is really easy for managers to fall in. Well, I know, I've got a goal. It's motivating for me, right? It's relevant to me to increase sales by X% or whatever. But you got to make sure that goal is relevant to the people who are going to execute too. They have to be personally meaningful. And like there was a thing years ago where companies were really pushing there was this idea that we need these big, hairy, aggressive goals, right? We need to go from $50 million company to a $500 million company. And hey, everybody's on board with that, right? Well, apart from the idea of whether you could actually achieve that, is the question of, is that something that has relevance to my employees? Does that make their life better in some way? So make sure that you're not substituting your goals for other people's. And the last one is this idea we talked about we mentioned with drifting goals is that you don't want to revise your goals downward to meet low performance. And I won't get into all the details. It's in the module, and it's some really fascinating research on this. But here's the problem. So you set a goal and you miss the goal, and so what do, right? So you say, oh, well, that goal was just out of reach, and what we need to do is we need a more realistic goal. Well, maybe if it really was a ridiculous goal, but generally it's a bad idea to revise the goal downward, because what's going to happen is you're going to institutionalize that suboptimal behavior. Again, this is about behavior change, right? If you revise the goals down to the existing level of performance, well, that performance is never going to change. So when you miss a goal, what you really need to do is change the behavior and not the goals. This one's important because managers, they're going to feel a lot of pressure from their crew, right? If we missed our goals, people are going to say, oh, that goal's ridiculous. It's out of the question. Well, no, you need to look at the behaviors that have to change in order to hit that goal.
Yeah, you don't want to set a bad precedent and keep it going.
Right.
So awesome. This is some very tactful advice. I know that it will change the way that I set goals and perform goals in the future. So this is really great. I want to know, for all of you that are listening right now, what you thought of the information that Michael's provided today. Please write into that questions box located on the right-hand side of your screen in the toolbar, both your feedback right now and also send in your questions. We're going to get to your questions in just a second here. But before I do so, I wanted to map out once again which of our learning programs discusses the principles Michael covered and give you another opportunity to receive a free trial. This is going to be really quick, and then we're going to get right to your questions. So first, in our sales platform, why you missed your goals and how to start hitting them. And in our leadership platform, why goal setting often doesn't lead to goal achievement. And then there's drifting goals, why goals often erode over time, which Michael briefly talked about. And then there's also other modules he talked about today that I completely was unaware that he was going to talk about. So he talked about line of sight.
I've got more if you want.
Yeah. Line of sight is a great module in there as well, and he talked about that briefly. So a lot of great content that aligns with what we talked about today. So we're going to launch the poll once again. It'll be up here during our Q&A, so go ahead and select one of those options. When you start your trial, you'll have access to all of the more than 100 sales programs, 70+ leadership programs, and another 25+ employment law modules. Like I said, each one is just 5 to 7 minutes long. Like in the beginning, I said, you can brew coffee in the same amount of time. Absolutely, right? Yeah, there's a goal. Yeah, get some coffee and watch a module. And it's focused on a single research-based leadership concept. You can access it from any device, so you really can make your coffee and watch one. The first one here, you'll receive access to the entire system, not just the demo site, as a trial member, and you'll be able to add members of your team as well. The second option is for those of you who are joining us who aren't quite ready to start your trial. That's completely fine. Just go ahead and select that second option, and we'll get you some more information. Again, this is going to stay up for the remaining of the program. Since we have no more slides, we're going to get to your live questions. So don't click out of that window, because we've heard from past attendees that they end up leaving the system, and then you'll miss out on all these awesome questions coming in. So stick with us here. All right, so Michael, are you ready for these?
We'll see.
All right. Well, first off, I want to just answer this question about, are we going to send anything like a recording or anything like that? We absolutely are going to send a recording. This is our final live program of this event, but the recording will come to you tomorrow. So look out for that, and you're welcome to share it with your team members. Let's see. The question we have here is from Marcy: should you give partial credit if a goal hasn't been fully met?
Hey, that's a great question, Marcy, and it's something that people struggle with, right? If I set a goal, should I, so what happens if I miss the goal? What if I get it, like if I get close but I miss it? And some people feel, well, no, a goal should be a goal, and again, we talked about drifting goals, right? You don't want to revise it down, but that's different from partial credit, and I think partial credit makes a lot of sense, actually, because again, think about what we're doing. We're trying to influence behavior, right? So if you set a goal and 6 months into the year, 9 months into the year, somebody looks at that goal and says, man, I know I'm not going to hit that goal. Then what happens? Well, they stop trying, right? It's out of their control. So it's no longer achievable. So if you have these sort of, if you say, yeah, but you can get partial credit, then you still have that opportunity to influence behavior. And again, the goal of the goal is to drive behavior. So I'm all for partial credit.
All right, so this next question comes from Jack. Should my team be setting their own goals?
Yeah, absolutely. They should be participating. It should be a project that happens between the manager and the employee. And people say that a lot, but in the real world, a lot of times what happens is people get busy, or the company has a goal and somebody's already translated that down into a goal for your department, and it's easy enough to just sort of pass that goal along. But again, what does participation in that process do? Well, it goes to that idea of achievable, right? If I'm involved in setting my goal, then I'm going to feel more engaged in achieving that goal. I'm going to feel that that's something I've sort of personally committed to. So so people are more likely to hit their goals, I think, when they've had a role in setting them. It doesn't mean just like let them set their own goals, but there should definitely be a process, because ultimately you need to hit the corporate goals, right, or the organizational goals, but there's different ways you can set goals to achieve that. So give people that opportunity to get involved.
Okay, so Sharon is asking if stretch goals work.
Interesting question, and I looked at some research on this, Sharon, but I left it out of the presentation just for time reasons. So I'm glad you brought it up, because now I get to talk about it. So the research on stretch goals is actually very interesting, because what most people consider a stretch goal isn't really what a stretch goal was originally defined to be. The original definition of a stretch goal, and this came from GE back in the Jack Welch days, was I wouldn't even call it a stretch goal, because stretch means you're stretching something. It was designed to break things, right? It was like, we're going to set a goal that nobody thinks we can hit. We don't know how we're going to do it, and it's going to drive fundamental change. So the idea was to actually set a goal that would create a crisis in the organization. And when that works, it's great. But a stretch goal is not something that like a frontline manager really should, they can come from them, because it really needs to be like a strategic decision, and it kind of is an all or nothing approach. Now the other thing that people say though is, well, a stretch goal is, well, I'm gonna I have a goal of increasing sales by 10%, so I'll give my guys a 15% stretch goal on top of that, right? So great, we hit the regular goal, but I'll give them something a little higher to aim for. And the research on that is there's not much research on it, but it's the research that's out there is kind of ambiguous, I guess. There's no real evidence that does anything, and if you think about it, the reason why that would be is, again, what are those goals about? They're about driving behavior. So is a stretch goal going to create different behaviors than the regular goal? Am I going to stop doing something when I hit my regular goal and then start doing something different to hit the stretch goal? I don't think so. So you're introducing some complexity into that goal setting process, and complex goals are always a lot harder to sort of manage and see the effects of them than a simple goal. Keep it really simple. And the other thing I found out about stretch goals, there was one study, and it said that the other problem with stretch goals is people sort of, what happens a lot of times, oh, well, we made the stretch goal, so now that becomes the regular goal, and we're going to put a new stretch goal on top of that. So people feel sometimes that that's just, a way to sort of make them work harder and harder and harder. So there can be some backlash against that. So I'd say set a goal and keep it simple and keep it focused on behavior.
Mm-hmm. All right. So Don is asking, I have people on my team that feel like they don't need goals to motivate them. They say, I'm a self-starter, I get things done. How should I respond?
Hey, Donna. Yeah, that's, you hear that a lot. It's true. People, well, I don't need a goal. Like I show up at work, I work really hard, and I bust through, and I move mountains, right? So why do I need a goal? Well, I think I would suggest for those people that the reason those people may need a goal as much or more than anyone else, and for a different reason. Again, think about what we talked about with behavior. A goal is designed to tell you what to do and what not to do. And those people who are just kind of like beasts, right? The danger for them is they get involved in too many things. They're doing so many things that it really becomes hard for them to stay focused on the things that matter most. So for really high achievers, I think the goal of a goal is much more what not to do, what not to say yes to, because they're going to be so tempted to say yes to everything.
I understand that feeling. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do. I think we all
all
feel
right.
that.
All right. Well, this has been a really great presentation. Thank you, Michael. And we did get some really positive feedback here. Great information and reminders. Ben said he's going to check out the modules and share with his team.
Great.
Mark said, good overview of SMART and a couple of nuggets to use for the future. Awesome. Let's see, Mary said very informational, awesome. We're so happy that all of you decided to join us this afternoon. I wanted to remind you that, once again, that we're going to be sending you a survey, and we'd like to get more of your feedback. So go ahead and click on that survey. It takes maybe a minute to complete, and I will tell you that we definitely look at all of your responses, and we use them to improve these programs, so your time is not wasted. Thanks once again for joining us, and if you selected a trial or more information, we'll be getting in contact soon.
Yep, great, thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, bye-bye.